Hello and welcome to SW119, Social Deviation and Social Work. For today, I am going to be discussing about the introduction of social deviance. So, what is deviance anyway? So, deviance is anything that deviates from what people generally accept as normal. It means that members of the society establish rules that guides behavior as to what is normally accepted, and violating these rules is a phenomenon called deviance. It is also a behavior that departs significantly from social expectation. So, as a member of a society, you are expected to act appropriately in a certain social situation based on your social role. Like, for example, being a mother or being a parent, being a sister, a brother, a friend, a neighbor, and even a student. However, violating these established rules as to how you should act or behave could be a form of deviance. So basically, deviance is the violation of social norms, and according to Dutch and Gerard, a social norm is a group's expectation of what is appropriate and acceptable behavior for its members. It is how they are supposed to behave and think. So in short, we can say that social norms are rules that guides behavior. So in here we have these examples. For more informal examples such as respecting your elderly, avoid using discriminatory remarks and comments when having a conversation with other people, flush the toilet after use, and always wash your hands when finished. A more formal example of social norm is law or laws. What are the characteristics of deviance? First, deviant behavior is based on the context of a social situation. It means that an act that may be deviant for one group may be normal for another. For instance, sleeping during office hours or working hours is considered deviant in the Philippine setting. But in Japan, it is normal for workers to sleep in their offices as it is a sign of hard work for them. Second, rules and norms are created by social expectation. So, certain social situation calls for a certain social expectation. And in order to meet these expectations, rules and norms were created. And lastly, deviance is the behavior plus the response of the social group. It means that for an act to be called deviant, it must be quote unquote labeled by the members of the group. Next, we also have here another concept of deviance. According to William Graham Sumner, deviance is the violation of established contextual, cultural, or social norms. So these social norms are either folkways, mores, and laws. So the first one is folkways. These are everyday norms that do not generate much uproar if they are violated. So folkways are the simplest form or category of social norm. So compared to laws, they do not require formal sanctions. Folkways are typically traditions. These are traditions that individuals follow for a long time and are very basic everyday courtesies. These are things like saying po and opo when speaking to elderly, saying thank you, and many other more. So, speaking of deviance, we can think of them as behaviors that might be considered rude if engaged in, like chewing loudly or picking one's nose in public. So usually, violating folkways would incite or would incite disapproving looks and reprimands as a formal of informal negative sanction. For instance, we can see here in this image, this child is chewing loudly, and as a form of informal negative sanction, we have here her mother giving him a disapproving look. Next, mores are moral norms that may generate more outrage if broken. Moral means knowing what is right and what is wrong. It is based on moral value or belief, and because mores are norms that are based on what is right or wrong, they produce strong feelings, thus generate more outrage if broken. So for instance, a person engaging in common law relationship. In the Philippine setting where Catholicism or Christianity is dominant, majority of the people are against cohabitation as Filipinos are guided by value system as Catholics. So older generations believe in the sanctity of marriage and that couples must get married before they can actually live together. Otherwise, people who engage in cohabitation are subjected to criticism. Another example is same-sex marriage. Same-sex marriage is also an example of deviance against this type of social norm. And lastly, law is considered the strongest norm because it is backed by official sanction. For example, uh, a crime is a type or an example of social deviance against this type of social norm. And when a person commits a crime, it is either he is being incarcerated or he pays a certain amount of money. So a crime is therefore an act of deviance that breaks not only a norm but also a law. So according to Becker, deviant behavior cannot be answered in a straightforward manner. Whether the act is deviant or not depends on many factors such as location, audience, and the individual committing the act. So this is actually the characteristics of deviance that we have discussed earlier on the previous slides. So another concept of deviance is that it refers to some form of rule-breaking behavior. And according to Becker, these rule breakers are called outsiders. They are called outsiders in a sense that they are the only ones who are committing or violating the rules of the society. Next, who or what is defined as deviant? Both acts and individuals and even entire groups can be defined as deviant. They are thought as aliens, misfits, outsiders, rule breakers, etc. So let's take a look at the Squid Game, for example. In a micro perspective, we can say that each of the players in the Squid Game is considered deviant. Individually, they committed acts that were against the rules of the game as well as the norms of the society. So, what were the deviant acts that we saw in the Korean series? So, we have their murder, stealing, pickpocketing, gambling, etc. On the other hand, looking at the macro perspective, the whole 456 players are groups of deviants. So they are a group of deviants violating the social norms with regards to earning money. So society says that people must work hard to earn a living for their needs. However, the players choose to join a game to earn money easily at the expense of their life. Next, low status persons, for example, ethnic minorities and poor people, are more likely to be perceived as deviant. Their good behavior explained away. Poor people with low educational attainment, for example, are more likely to be perceived to work on menial jobs and therefore earn less income. Because of this perception, people tend to think that they resort to illegal acts such as robbery and drug dealing, without even realizing that not all poor people resort to such deviant acts and that some of them are actually working hard to enhance their situation. On contrary, higher status persons, for example, priests, doctors, and even politicians, are less likely to be defined as deviant. Their bad behavior explained away. So for instance, let's take a look at the current administration. Indeed, the Duterte administration has provided a lot of projects for the development of our economy, such as the Build project. However, those good deeds are being used to justify or explain away the extrajudicial killings that have happened before for his Oplan Tokhang operation. And a lot of people, especially on social media platforms, are actually agreeing on this operation, saying that, quote and unquote, it will lessen the criminals or crime in the country and that it is only right. However, as social workers, we believe in the capacity of the person to change, and we believe that all people deserve second chances, and resorting to killings is not good. Next, before we can actually move on with our next topics and learn more about deviance, let us first define the following words. What is social control? Social order, sanctions such as positive sanction, negative sanction, formal sanction, and informal sanction. Normative compliance, social cohesion, stigma, crime, and stereotype. First, social control is the enforcement of norms to ensure conformity. So it is making sure that everybody is following the rules or social norms. The underlying goal of social control is to maintain social order o mapanatili ang kaayusan. Social order, in the other hand, is an arrangement of practices and behaviors on which society's members base their daily lives. So let us think of it as a handbook that serves as a guide for a certain social situation that you are into. So social order, so depending on what social situation you are into, there are specific arrangement of practices that must be followed. Next, sanctions are enforcing the laws or rules. It can also be a reward or punishment. So sanction, we have here positive and negative sanction. Positive sanctions are reward for conforming to norms. For example, students who submit class requirements before deadline gets plus points. While negative sanctions are punishment for violating the norms, such as students who are caught cheating during an exam may no longer continue as a punishment. Formal sanctions are imposed by legal system. So this could be crimes such as rape can be punishable by law. So these laws are formal sanction. An informal sanction may emerge in a face-to-face social interaction within groups. So for example, talking while your mouth is full is considered to be rude and an unacceptable behavior. Disapproving looks and verbal reprimands may draw from such situation. This kind of sanction are what we call informal sanctions. So disapproving looks and verbal reprimands are forms or examples of informal sanctions. In order for us to deeply understand the sanction, we can apply the negative and positive sanction to both the formal and informal sanction. So formal sanctions are positive or negative consequences that are applied by officials. We have here an example of positive formal sanction: good grade given by a teacher, a medal of honor given by the government. Another example of formal positive sanction is in our LGU, we are actually being given a certificate of recognition for passing our board exam. So our municipality are recognizing the good efforts and being an exemplary model of these board passers through this certificate of recognition. And an example of negative formal sanction is speeding ticket given by a cop or a police officer and detention given by a principal. So another example is incarceration for those who committed crimes. On the other hand, informal sanctions are positive or negative consequences given out by members of the group. So if in the formal sanction, we have here being applied by officials, usually being applied by officials and high-ranking individuals. In informal sanction, we are actually looking at the members of the group. So we have here examples of positive and negative informal sanction. For positive informal sanction, we have here inviting someone to sit with you in the cafeteria because they help you in class. So another example of this is a teacher giving out compliments to students. And a form of negative informal sanction is disapproving looks and reprimands. Another example here is yelling at someone talking or texting loudly in a movie theater, and giving someone a dirty look for telling on you in class. Okay? So next, we have here normative compliance. It means abiding by society's norms or basically following rules of group life. And social cohesion is a term associated with functionalism and refers to the extent to which people in society are bound together and integrate and share common values. So in order for social cohesion to be achieved, it is important that people in a group or society have the same values and share common beliefs so that social cohesion will be achieved. And it also means that uh, social cohesion is being united and having the sense of togetherness and oneness. Next, stigma. It involves negative attitudes or discrimination against someone based on a distinguishing characteristic such as mental illness. For example, or for instance, people living with depression are often stigmatized. They are often called as dramatic and lazy, and their feelings are being disregarded, and of course, they are also being violated. Another example of this is people with or people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia. Usually, they are regarded or they are being labeled as crazy. Okay, and in general, those who have mental illnesses are actually being called crazy, and this is an example of stigma. Next, crime is forms of deviance in which formal penalties are imposed by the society. Stereotyping. These are negative. These are often unfair and untrue belief that many people have about all people or things with a particular characteristics. Okay, this is actually overgeneralizing. For instance, as we take a look at this picture, all people with tattoos or even those who have undergone body modification are called or being regarded as bad people due to their scary appearances. But not all people with tattoos are actually bad, and actually some of them are engaged in activities that helps society and even communities and even help children with special needs and other social situations. Next, we also have three types of deviance. We have here odd behavior, admired or good behavior, and bad behavior. Odd behavior. These are behaviors that are not criminal but still differ from acceptable behavior. These forms of deviance range from such things as outlandish modes of dress through mildly eccentric forms of behavior. So we call this behavior as weird, strange, or peculiar. For example, some people find it unacceptable for a man to dress up in women's clothing. And another example is an individual's drive to constantly clean and organize things. So it is actually normal for a person to clean and organize things, but doing it excessively and constantly is somewhat perceived as odd. For example, those who have been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, they tend to have this kind of behavior, and it is actually regarded as an odd behavior. Next, admired or good behavior. An example of deviance that might be considered as good or admirable behavior while also breaking social norm might be something like heroism, the saving of the life of another person whilst putting your own life in a great danger, for example. Saving another person's life is actually good, but putting your life in risk is a form of deviance. So heroism, like in this example, we have here Iron Man the saving the earth is considered to be admired or good behavior. Okay. Next, bad behavior. Deviant behavior in this category tends to be restricted to law-breaking or criminal behavior. So more likely on criminal acts, criminal behavior, and etc. These are behavior that in some way is seen as being something more than simply outlandish or eccentric. Depending upon the time and place, forms of behavior in this category might include crimes of violence, crimes against property, and so forth. So these are more formal type of deviance. Next, perspective in deviance. We actually have two perspectives in deviance. We have objectivist and subjectivist perspective. So objectivist perspective, um, objectivists believe something is deviant when it violates a social norm. If anyone deliberately steps outside of those norms, it is inherently deviant. In other words, deviance is a characteristic or quality that violates behavioral standards or expectation. In objectivist perspective, rules are established and to be followed, and when it is violated, it is considered deviant. So, in objectivist perspective, norms are established, okay? Norms are made in order for the society to follow so that we maintain social order in the society. And in objectivist perspective, norms will tell if the act is deviant or not. So, take note that in objectivist perspective, we are following the norms. Okay, so we are, so norms serves as guide for us to behave. Meanwhile, subjectivist perspective believe that deviance is a subjective perception of human beings rather than an objective characteristic or quality. So in this perspective, nothing is inherently deviant. It is all about the labels that are applied to it. According to Emil Durkheim, no act is inherently deviant in and of itself. Deviance is defined socially and will vary from one group to another. And obviously then, the group in a given society has a lot of power, will have a major role in defining what acts are deviant. So it's still dependent on the society and those who hold the power. They need to label what act is deviant and what is not. But for this to work, most people must acknowledge that power. There is no shared universal characteristic to tell us what is deviant or normal, so someone must tell us. So that is subjectivist perspective. And that is the end of our discussion in Introduction to Social Deviance.